You're tuning in to the Black Hollywood Live Network, featuring news, interviews, and commentary on all things Black Hollywood. Hollywood redefined. From Los Angeles, California, presented by Maria Menounos and streaming live thanks to Akamai Technologies. This is Black Hollywood Live. Justice is served. Featuring the week's roundup and commentary on legal news. Black Hollywood Live. Hollywood redefined.
You're listening to Black Hollywood Live.
And now, the host for Black Hollywood Live, Justice is Served.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Justice is Served. This is the show where we give you all of the latest legal news. I'm your host, Maria Fagel, joined by my lovely co-host, criminal defense attorney Sara Azari.
Thank you.
Administrative attorney Chelsea Glauber. Hello, ladies.
Hi. Hello.
I am very much looking forward to doing this show with all three of us on the panel, because we've been missing each other the last couple weeks.
It's a big day for us.
Yeah. It's a big day. As Phil said, the powerhouse three women are in the house. We have a lot to talk about. I'm just going to jump right into it. We're going to start with Case of the Week. Sarah, was interesting. You emailed me this story earlier in the week, which I think the LA Times has been doing a really good job with coverage of this story. Usually for Case of the Week, we try to do a more national story that's been getting a lot of attention. This particular story is a very local story to Los Angeles, but I found it so fascinating. I thought it would make a great segment for the three of us to discuss. Governor Jerry Brown rejected the parole for someone who has been a member of the Mexican Mafia. His name is Rene Enriquez. They call him Boxer. He has been serving prison time for 2 murders committed in 1989. First, he ordered the killing of a young mother. Then, he personally killed a fellow Mexican Mafia member. But the story is, this is Rene Enriquez right here. He turned his life around. In 2002, he left the prison gang, which I want to talk with you, especially Sarah, with your criminal defense background, about what the Mexican Mafia is. Because for a lot of people who, even if you live in Los Angeles, but especially outside of Los Angeles, outside of California, you don't necessarily know what the Mexican Mafia is and what the idea of a prison gang is. So he was part of the Mexican Mafia. In 2002, he changed his life around. He decided to instead turn on the former people who were his colleagues in this prison gang, and he's tried to turn a new leaf in his life. He has become an expert witness where he will go into trials. He will testify against defendants who are members of the Mexican Mafia, and he will explain to the jury what the Mexican Mafia is. And one reason why it's so important to have these former members turn a new leaf is they will tell the people in the prison who in the prison is a part of the Mexican Mafia, and they get validated. I'm sure you'll talk about this. So it's important to have these people, you know, be a law enforcement source. They do have an expertise to share and to give, and he has turned his life around. That's why I want to get both of your opinions on this. Should he be granted parole? This is someone who, yes, 2 murders, 2 people are dead
a week apart
because of him. So that's one thing. But he's turned his life around, and for the last 12 years, he has been helping law enforcement, and he's been trying to do good. So should he have been granted parole or not?
I think, you know what, Mari, I actually read Jerry Brown's decision. It's like a 3-page decision, and it makes absolute sense, because you look at the violent crimes. I mean, the Mexican Mafia is not the East Side goofballs, okay? The Mexican Mafia is the most serious criminal organization whose empire starts in the prison system and expands to the streets. And so if something happens in East LA right now, within minutes, the brothers in Pelican Bay know about it, and probably tomorrow morning there's an order out as to how to resolve the issue. So it's a very violent gang, and this guy was not just a member. He was a leader, he was an organizer, he was up there for 2 decades at least, and he ordered the execution of, the two murders that you were talking about are a week apart. He then stabbed another Mexican Mafia member while he's in Men's Central Jail. 28 times. The guy survived, but nonetheless. So this is a serious gang, and he was not just a member. He was up there in the ranks. He earned his stripes because, in this type of a gang, you earn your stripes by going to prison and by taking the case, basically. So the leaders are in prison, and the rest of the guys are doing what they need to do to get to prison. It's a big deal to get to prison. And so I think, Jerry Brown did a very detailed analysis in this 3-page decision and said, look, yes, he helped prosecutors, FBI, DA's offices, LAPD, whatnot, but when you look at the violent crimes he committed and you look at the 28 very serious disciplinary incidents that he's written up for while he's in custody, he's not safe. He's not safe to release into the community. And what I found interesting was he used his own safety as a basis for blocking his parole. He said, this guy is a registered sex offender. He's on the sex offender website. His address is listed. And this puts himself, his family, his parole officers in the community in danger. So you know what? He's safe where he is.
Yeah.
And as liberal as I am, I just think that there are far safer people that deserve to parole than Enriquez, from La M, which is how the Mexican Mafia is referred to. I think that this, you're talking about the daddy of all prison gangs, and it's very serious. And I agree with his decision.
Chelsea, I just want to ask you about one particular point in the article that I found disturbing was the fact that this person was about to be released from prison, and the family members of the victim who he killed didn't even know about it until the LA Times decided to do a story, which, by the way, the LA Times only even did a story because the law enforcement used taxpayer dollars to have this guy go to speak to a group of business leaders in downtown LA. And as you said, because this guy is such a security threat, taxpayer dollars went towards protecting it. And then the LA Times decided to do a story, and the business leaders organization reimbursed him. Once the LA Times did a story, the poor children of this victim who was killed, Cynthia Galvedon, read it, and they were like, oh, the killer of our mother is about to be released, and we didn't even know about it? And what do you think about that?
Right. Well, absolutely, the victim's family should have some say whether they have been apologized to, whether they feel their own safety is compromised by the release of this guy. So they didn't even know. When they did find out, they made an effort to go and share their thoughts, which were to please don't let this guy out. We are afraid for ourselves still. So I think it's a very important point that the victims' families be acknowledged as part of this equation, and they almost weren't if for not their own efforts to hear or have them their side be heard.
Yeah, but you know what? Also, this is. To me, this is the issue. This is the responsibility of the Department of Corrections, which, by the way, has given birth to the largest prison gangs in the country: Mexican Mafia, Nuestra Familia, the Aryan Brotherhood, the white supremacist. They are all born in our prison system. I mean, this is not a perk for us Native Californians, but this is the CDC, and it's complete bureaucracy, it's complete dysfunction. I'm not surprised that the victim's family was not informed, as they should have been.
Well, I just found it unfortunate because if it weren't for this fluke that the biggest newspaper in the city happened to write about this man, this family would have never even been apprised of the situation. Yeah. But one thing you touched on, Sarah, that ended up for me being the deciding factor when I think about, okay, this guy is a murderer, but he's turned his life around. Should he be released to the streets? The one decision that I think Governor Brown was right on was, this is a huge security threat to himself and to his family. He may be better off sitting in prison because if people don't understand about the inner workings of the Mexican Mafia, they don't understand, like you said, how powerful they are. Even though they're in prison, they are calling the shots of what happens on the streets of Los Angeles every single day. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the movie American Me with Edward James Olmos. Anyone who wants to learn more about the Mexican Mafia needs to watch this movie. Edward James Olmos is one of the few people in Los Angeles County who is allowed to have a concealed carry permit in the county because of the Mexican Mafia, because he is the star of a movie that talks about the history of the Mexican Mafia. There has been a green light out on him ever since this movie was made in the 90s. Literally, his safety is compromised every single day because of a movie that's almost 2 decades old now. That's how serious a threat the Mexican Mafia is. And like you said, he's on a list. His address is out there. And so he is it's a threat to himself, to his family, to his parole agents.
Well, in his petition, he said he would go in witness protection so that his identity wouldn't be known, and he wouldn't be on the sex offender list, so I don't know how that would be fair.
And you think they can't find him?
Well, no, he doesn't get to pick whether he's on a sex offender list. If you're convicted of a sex offense, you get on that list.
And this happened when he was a teenager. He was involved in a gang rape.
Right, but that doesn't matter. I mean, I had the sex registration statutes are it's Penal Code 290. It's so harsh. It's so unfair because there are rapists, there are people like him, and then there's the guy who's 19 and tapped the butt of some 15-year-old, and he's on there too. And it's really, I mean, that law is so in need of change. Sorry to change course here, but I think that he can't get around that. So his address is out, and I also think that one thing that was interesting about Jerry Brown's decision was that he found him to have a very shallow understanding or self-awareness of why he did these things. He said, I was taking drugs and I was it was a survival thing, and I know that gang members join gangs to belong. I mean that is a typical thing for a kid from the streets who joins a gang. But with him, it's almost like he minimized these really violent crimes that he'd committed, which didn't help him with Jerry Brown. It's like he's not even really understanding.
I was listening to an interview, and he sounds incredibly intelligent and articulate, and I'm sure if he would have been asked, he would have probably given a very insightful reason as to why he was involved. I'm not sure why that wasn't part of the petition.
Well, he said, I can't diagnose myself. I really can't answer that question. This is what he says to the parole board. And then, he says, they say, well, in 2004 and 2005, you actually smuggled drugs into the prison. Why'd you do that? And he says, oh, well, I was so depressed because the law enforcement was not using me that much back then. So, this guy doesn't even have a relapse prevention program in place. So we let him off on parole, and, at some point his snitch career is going to be over. Yeah. And actually, I'm not going to name names, but a federal prosecutor wanted to use him as an expert, and the judge said, no, he's been out of this gang for, a decade. He's no longer an expert.
His expertise only is relevant for so long.
Correct.
So
it's like a modeling career, Yeah. So at some point it's over.
Before we scare the residents of LA too much, I do want to talk about an article that I saw that names the Mexican Mafia as one of the reasons why crime has actually gone down in the last couple of decades. Is because they control so much of the street. There's almost like no competition, and for a while they required no drive-bys, and so it's not all bad news for LA residents.
So we need to thank the Mexican.
I don't know about thanking, but I just don't want to leave everybody with an impression that they need to be super fearful, walk
right.
around. I mean, yes, be cautious and vigilant like normal, but I just didn't want to instill more fear than already exists.
But on the flip side, too, there are, there's an organization like Homeboy Industries with Father Boyle who basically reforms these gang members, gives them a job, removes their tattoos for free, which is an expensive process, and teaches them how to become law-abiding citizens and not have to belong to a gang family. And I admire, I worked closely with that organization because I ran their legal clinic, and that's rehabilitation. That's a different story. But this guy, just because he, was the darling of law enforcement
and snitched on his fellow colleagues, should he be out on the streets now?
I don't really like snitches, but
yes.
So it doesn't sound like the worst prison experience for him. He's got a lot of. He
gets to go out.
Well, because he's a law enforcement's darling. Right. But I do think, I'm glad that we've been able to use this show to talk about the Mexican Mafia, because it's something in Los Angeles that is, I don't mean to scare tactic people, but it is, a big part of crime in the community. And we will talk about the Mexican Mafia again on this show in the future, especially one book that Renee Enriquez actually was a part of was called The Black Hand. It's written by Chris Blatchford, and it's about the Mexican Mafia rising up and its history. So maybe we'll get Chris Blatchford on this show. Love to have Father Boyle on the show to talk about Homeboy Industries. So there's a lot more to talk about on this show regarding gang involvement in Los Angeles, because it's fascinating to us on a local level, but also on a national level.
Yeah, absolutely. And they're here to stay. And if they want, they'll reach out and touch you. Mexican Mafia. Anyway, all right. So on the docket?
Yes.
Okay. First on the docket, we are going to update you on the Aaron Hernandez trial. There's lots been going on in the past week. There's been the issue of the text messages, probably the final text messages sent by Lloyd to his sister. There was a ruling by the judge, I believe last week, where she told the prosecutors they cannot elicit any testimony about text messages sent by Lloyd. But the ruling changed on Monday, and the judge said, look, I will let the text messages in, the fact that they were sent or how many were sent, but the content is inadmissible, and so is Lloyd's sister's reaction to these text messages. So this is a huge loss for the prosecution because, what was said, which was, just so you know who I'm with, NFL. Okay. The reason the judge kept this out was because it is more prejudicial than probative. So I do believe it's a correct ruling. I'm wondering what you
Okay, Chelsea and I are shaking our heads.
Of course you are.
Okay, the reason why this ruling upsets me is because either go one way or the other. The judge is basically trying to protect himself on appeal by saying, okay, I'll let the fact that he sent these texts come in, but not the content of the text or her reaction to these texts. That's such a bullshit move. Either don't let the text in at all, or if you're gonna let it in, the jury's always gonna be wondering, the empty chair. They're gonna be wondering what is in the content of those text messages. Right. And the fact that those texts said, I'm with NFL, to me, Chelsea?
I agree with you. I think that they should be let in entirely because this is the victim's own words. He's not here to speak for himself, obviously. So this is the closest thing that we have to it. I understand.
But
here's
look,
the thing.
If he said Hernandez, Aaron, something that was more identifiable,
he's scared for his
and
life. He
unequivocal.
has time for 3 letters, NFL.
Well, you know what? I just, from an evidentiary standpoint, I think this judge did the right thing because it is prejudicial.
And fine, then what bothers me, I think we have 3 different views here. Chelsea thinks go all the way, let the jurors see the text, let them see that the text said, I'm with NFL, and hear the sister's reaction. You think that the judge made the right decision, that the fact that the texts were sent should be come in, but not the content, not the reaction. I think either one or the other. I think it does more harm to let the fact that text messages were sent be heard by the jury, but not to fill in the dotted line of what those texts said. So I'm fine with your decision that the judge shouldn't let the text in, but then don't let any reference to the text in at all, because that's more harmful.
It happens often, I think, because a judge feels
is trying
more
to protect his own ass.
Right. It's a she, but yeah. I mean, she's trying to be fair to both sides, but from an evidentiary standpoint, I think she's doing the right thing. So the next thing that came up is .45 caliber shell casing with the gum wrapped around it that was found in the rent-a-car that Aaron Hernandez returned, called for DNA expert who testified about it. And there's been an attack by the defense on the DNA evidence here, saying that this is a secondary transfer of Hernandez's DNA from the gum to the shell casing. And again, I have to say that I agree with Sultan, Hernandez's attorney, because he's saying, look, you're the police department. You're trained in evidence gathering. Why do you go there and pick up these items from the trash and put it in your truck? Why don't you put it in an evidence bag? And that's a good question. And
it is a great question, but it doesn't mean he didn't do it.
Okay.
Do you remember O.J. Simpson?
Yes, and this is an O.J. Simpson type of case. It's a circumstantial case. So
where the defense's only legs to stand on are pointing the fingers at the police department and their shoddy work. But guess what? It worked worked in OJ, so it could work here.
It could work here, and not only that, but in these circumstantial cases, every little bit, like Chelsea and I were talking about this last week, every little bit counts for the prosecution, and every little attack will ultimately count for the defense. So it's just about all these little pieces. That's why I think this was not a good week for the prosecutors. Next, what happened? There was testimony by at least 2 housekeepers about guns in Hernandez's home, under his mattress, in his socks drawer, and in his pocket that dropped out of his khakis or whatever. So again, is it a .45? They don't know what kind of gun it was or what kind of guns they found. They just identify it as heavy, 15 centimeters long, and that's not really probative.
And then that they weren't there when they cleaned the house right after the murder.
Right. Clearly, things were moved around. But I mean, the murder weapon is not there. I don't care how many guns are found. There's a .22 at the crime scene. There's all these guns at the house. Where is the murder weapon? That's the key. That's the key evidence.
But I don't think that that's required. I think he can still be convicted without it.
Of course, if everything else falls into place, right? Right.
Yeah, but that's why I think it's interesting that the judge let in the fact that let these 2 housekeepers testify to the fact that they had seen guns in this home, but isn't letting in the content of those text messages. These rulings seem to be, because to me, it's almost more harmful for a jury to hear, oh, this guy had guns in his home. A lot of times juries, they get a lot of information, a lot of legal law thrown at them at the end, jury instructions, and they go with their gut feeling. They go with their sense. Is this a bad guy? Yeah, he did it. We haven't been back in the jury room, so we don't know, but a lot of times they go with their gut. So when they hear something like, oh, these 2 housekeepers testified that he had guns all over the place in his home, that's almost more harmful than a text that reads, I'm with NFL, which, yeah, you don't know necessarily what that means. So to me, the rulings, will obviously be an issue on appeal. They're not consistent. Right. They'll obviously be an issue on appeal.
And lastly, where are his shoes? So this to me is really interesting because there's this one footprint near Lloyd's body, and it's supposedly a Nike Air Jordan shoe that they know that Hernandez had bought prior to Lloyd's murder, and when they went in with a search warrant and looked at and searched the home, they actually took a photograph of 3 pairs of shoes, sneakers, and they believed that it belonged to Wallace, Ortiz, and Hernandez, the 3 co-defendants. They took a photograph, so that clearly they knew that this was relevant evidence, but they failed to seize it, even though the search warrant allowed them to take the shoes. To me, that's mind-boggling. So now, where are the shoes? There's also a jail call from Hernandez to his fiancée saying, hey, are my clothes and shit still at the house? And, she's like, why are you asking about your clothes? So it's really suspect because the shoes are gone. The second search, they couldn't find these shoes. And I think in a case, again, circumstantial like this, having a shoe that fits the shoe print, this came up in OJ as well.
Are you going to coin a term instead of the glove? We're going to talk about the shoe. You should
if
call.
If the shoe don't fit,
you must acquit. Oh, no. There! You just gave Hernandez's defense his last line to the jury.
No, and also, can we talk about the housekeeper that saw the fiance carrying out the big bulky thing that seemed to be too heavy, which they assume was ammunition, guns, whatever else, and that they said she looked very anxious, was crying back and forth, not like a grieving type of upset, but like a nervous peeking out the window looking to see if people were coming. So I think that is pretty damning evidence that the fiance knew
in a
something
circumstantial
was up.
case, something like that would be more important than, when you don't have much to go on.
I think
those things become more and more
very
important.
helpful to the prosecution.
But we'll be talking a lot more about this case.
Absolutely.
We'll be following it every week, and I do hope that we're going to have a reporter who's been covering this case in Boston as it's been unfolding. Will call into the show and give us the latest updates as well.
All right, next on the docket, Bruce Jenner may actually be liable for the fatal car crash on PCH. We talked last week about a video that was on an MTA bus, and that video is in the possession of the LA Sheriff's Department, Lost Hills Division. However, they're not making any comments on what's on this video. TMZ reports that it shows Jenner puffing on a cigarette, being inattentive, going at a high speed, and then crashing into the Lexus in front of him, and that he was actually the sole responsible party for this accident. But again, this comes from TMZ. We don't know what exactly is on this video, which will ultimately determine whether or not he's at fault for the accident. Now, whether he's going to be charged criminally by the DA's office, my gut says no, because a lot of people are involved in fatal car crashes, and most of those cases don't end up in criminal charges. But he is Bruce Jenner, and the DA's office likes to make examples out of celebrities. So if he does get charged, I think it's because of his celebrity status. I mean, somebody died. He was definitely driving negligently in that he didn't maintain a safe distance. Perhaps he was even speeding. And
I think
so
they
that's all it
determined he
takes.
wasn't. He was going 46 miles per hour when he slammed on the brakes, and then 8 when he hit her. So that's not speeding. They've in the analysis
about
that
the
I've
distance,
seen,
though?
Well, that's the thing, is that's probably all he's guilty of, is
Right.
following too closely. He wasn't texting. He wasn't under the influence. He wasn't speeding. So those are factors for why I think he probably won't face criminal prosecution. I think it'll be very hard for 12 citizens to convict a man of criminal homicide for following too closely, something that most of us do all the time.
But the elements of vehicular manslaughter require the one traffic violation, so the not following closely is sufficient. I mean, if you want to really go about it technically,
Yeah.
right? One traffic violation, a death in the accident, and negligence. Doesn't even have to be gross.
But I think a jury wouldn't convict. I don't
And I
think
hope it
prosecutors
doesn't
will
even
waste
go
their
that
time.
far. I
Yeah.
think you hit the nail on the head. If the DA's office decides to bring charges, it will be for one reason and one reason only, because he was on that show called Keeping Up with the Kardashians.
Right.
That would be,
Right.
and he was an Olympic athlete.
Right,
But
exactly.
he's known for one and not the other now.
Right.
If there are criminal charges brought against him, I think it would be unfortunate, because I think it would just be to make an example out of a famous person. Because do I think he will likely be sued civilly in a
Absolutely.
personal injury suit? Absolutely. Do I think he should be criminally charged? Absolutely not. The only other thing I was thinking, and this shows what a big Kardashian fan I was, and still am, is the fact that he was puffing on a cigarette when this happened. There's actually an episode in the show where he gets so upset that Kris Jenner still smokes cigarettes, and then him and Kendall Jenner, they pretend that she's smoking a cigarette to kind of show the bad influence that Kris has on her. And so I thought that he was so anti-smoking, so that upset me.
Yeah. I was
And
disappointed by
athlete
that, too.
smoking, what a turnoff. Plus, he's going through all this like hormonal sex change stuff.
Which
I
is
don't know if you
why
could be smoking
the
doing
DA's
that.
office would be insane to bring this in front of a jury, because this man who, first of all, people already feel bad for him
Right.
because he was married to Kris Jenner. Now they feel bad for him
Right.
because of all the attention that's been brought on him. This is a man who's finally, at a late stage in life, in his 60s, is deciding to allegedly transition into a woman. And under all the stress he's under, the paparazzi chasing him, this would be a terrible case to bring in front of a jury.
Yeah. All right, Jay-Z has 99 problems and a love child or two. There's a paternity suit against him by Ryder.
I'm only laughing at the photo
I know.
because, my God, the lips, the
Yeah.
nose.
No, I don't see the resemblance.
You're
saying you see a resemblance?
There is a bit of a resemblance,
No.
but this lawsuit stems from a few years ago, where Rymer's mother brings an action in court to compel Jay-Z to take a DNA test, and the lawsuit alleges that Jay-Z lied to get the case thrown out, so he doesn't have to submit to a DNA testing. And so keep in mind, though, Rymer, first of all, he's a horrible rapper in my opinion. I'm not a rap connoisseur, but
I didn't think it was bad.
I think it would definitely help his career to be able to say Jay-Z is my father. I mean, that's a huge thing. But Jay-Z has had this situation happen before. He had a child with Chanel Scott, a model, and he paid her $1 million just to keep his name
Reportedly.
off the birth certificate. I mean, if that's the way to go, I definitely recommend it with respect to Rymer.
Well, I thought it was really interesting how, instead of submitting to a paternity, his attorneys argued that they had the wrong jurisdiction. That because he was a resident of New York and not New Jersey, that the case
Which
could be
makes
heard
me
in New
wonder what the
Jersey.
result of that paternity test would be, because, you know, this has happened before. We've talked in the show about people coming forward and saying they're the spawn of a celebrity. Justin Bieber has faced this before. We talked about this on the show in the past. Should Justin Bieber just take the paternity test or not? It was some crazy fan at a concert who claimed that she was knocked up by Justin Bieber. And on the show, we were kind of like, well, if it's not true, just take the paternity test. test.
Right.
But then again, it's like, so every time that someone comes out of the woodwork
You
and
gotta
claims
take a
to be the
test.
celebrity spawn, you got to go take a test. That gets a little bit ridiculous. And what
Right.
kind of precedent are you setting? But it's so, I can see both sides. If he really isn't his son, then take the paternity test and have it be over. Why claim, wrong jurisdiction or whatever it is to fight this? But at the same time, is he going to be taking a paternity test every time someone
Right.
claims they're
Right.
Blue
No,
Ivy's
yeah.
brother?
I mean, there's definitely a resemblance. There isn't on the talent side.
Come on,
I don't see it.
Chelsea.
I do
There's
not
so
see
many.
physically.
If you guys follow, not that I'm an ad for the Fat Jewish on Instagram, but I follow Fat Jewish. This is this guy
It's
who posts all these
hysterical.
viral
Yeah.
memes, and he always is posting things where they swap Beyonce's face and Jay-Z's face, or they put croissants instead of Jay-Z's lips. Those croissant lips are exactly the same.
Those are patentable. They definitely are. All right. Next on the docket, the verdict came down, the American Sniper trial, late yesterday, actually. The former Marine was convicted of the murders of Chris Kyle, who was the author of American Sniper, as well as his friend Chad Littlefield. And, this trial, for those of you who may not have followed it, hinged on whether Routh, Eddie Ray Routh, the former Marine, was mentally ill to the point of insanity or not. And, there was evidence, there was definitely something not right with him and that he was mentally ill, but the prosecutors succeeded in showing that despite this mental illness, he knew right from wrong. He had confessed several times. He had said, I took two souls, I'm going to take another, something along those lines. And he had also fled the scene, fled the police, and they found him down the line. So, I think that he's appealing his conviction, and I'm curious to see what you girls think about the verdict. Do you think it was expected, or did you think he's going to succeed at
I think
proving-
when you said that he fled the scene, to me, if I were a juror, that shows you know right from wrong, because if you don't think what you did was wrong, you wouldn't flee the scene. That's why we have a jury instruction that says fleeing the scene can be used as evidence of consciousness of guilt, because you did something wrong, so you fled the scene. So I thought
agree.
that was important. And I do think this was an important case in terms of lately in the last decade or so, we have seen a lot of PTSD cases being used to say not guilty by reason of insanity, or at least that's the defense. So I think people watch this case closely. The main thing I was thinking is just how tragic this was and the timing of it. I mean, Tara Kyle, the widow of Chris Kyle, she wasn't there when the actual verdict was read. And I read an interview with her this week. These last couple weeks have been so hard on her, because at the same time that she's promoting this movie that is the last legacy of her husband, she's had to attend the criminal trial of the man who killed her husband. She had to be flown, the Weinstein Brothers company flew her to Los Angeles to attend the Oscars on Sunday, and she flew right back to attend the last days of this trial, and she said that she was exhausted.
It's
and
almost schizophrenic. It's like two completely different lives.
Two completely different lives. The blur between what's reality and what's a movie and a fantasy. And I just, I feel bad for her. I think that it was the right verdict because it gives her family closure. It gives the family of Chris Littlefield closure, and I think it was the right result in the end.
I wish I had something colorful to say that disagreed with you both, just to liven this up. But I there is no controversy here. He knew what he was doing. Tragic, and I hope that it's some small consolation to the widow that her husband's murderer was convicted.
But I do think that in future cases where defense attorneys are representing a client who has PTSD, they will look to this trial and see what the defense did right, what the defense did wrong, in terms of trying to translate PTSD into a not guilty by reason of insanity. Because this isn't the first time we've seen an Army veteran murder someone because of their PTSD.
I mean, I don't think it's arguable that seeing war, seeing a lot of what these people see will mess you up. But does it mess you up to where you no longer know what's right or wrong? That's the issue here, and I think that's where the line gets crossed. Yes, people get messed up by seeing what they are forced to see and be involved with, but people still know what's right from wrong, I think, most of the time.
All right, and last on the docket, George Zimmerman gets lucky again. We talked about him at length a few weeks ago, and how he gets lucky with the ladies with all the domestic violence charges that get dropped left and right. But now the Department of Justice has informed him that it is closing the investigation of a civil rights violation involving the shooting death of Trayvon Martin back in 2012. As most of you remember, George Zimmerman was acquitted in the trial of this murder in 2013, and then the Department of Justice opened its own investigation, and there was a promise by Attorney General Eric Holder, who's now on his way out of the office, saying, you know what, despite the verdict, we are going to do our job. We're going to do an investigation that is really thorough to see whether there was any civil rights violations. And he also went on to say that then it was interesting that they said that they're going to interview some additional witnesses, that they think there might be some additional information, and then suddenly it's closed, and they let the Martin family know that there's no violation. And what I find interesting is that Holder said that irrespective of what the decision is going to be on this investigation, they're going to provide a very detailed analysis of what happened during the course of this investigation. But where is that information? I don't know if this is sort of like wrap it up because he's leaving the office and he just wants to get this over with, along with the Ferguson investigation that's also ongoing, or if they really did a thorough investigation and truly found that there's no civil rights violation. So
I'm so not surprised by this.
I'm not surprised, and I think that they did do a thorough investigation, but I think they made up their minds and they had a conclusion a long time ago. I think they held on to it, and finally Eric Holder made this promise that this was something that was going to happen during his term. He's about to step down, so they finally had to release it. I think they knew long before, and I think they knew during everything that was going on with Ferguson and Garner, and they thought this isn't a good time to release this.
Right.
I'm not surprised, and I'm disappointed only in that every time a Trayvon Martin, an Eric Garner, a Michael Brown situation happens, the DOJ will come in and say, oh, well, even if, the justice system on the state level, let you guys down, we're going to investigate it. It could be a civil rights claim. We'll swoop in and investigate it. They have no teeth. They say that it'll be different and the DOJ will investigate it and it could lead to a different outcome. It leads to the exact same outcome. So it's almost like promising people this hope to cling on to, and that's why I said they knew about this conclusion a while ago. I think they knew that George Zimmerman wasn't going to be prosecuted by the DOJ, but they sat on it and until they could no longer sit on it.
Yeah. All right, so turning it over to Chelsea for tipping the scales.
All right, so our tipping the scales story involves a man who was wrongly convicted of a double murder and spent 15 years in prison, and he is now suing Northwestern University for $40 million because he says that the university's Innocence Project framed him, essentially. So basically what happened is this Innocence Project, and I know that you ladies know a little bit more about this than I do, but the Innocence Project is a national organization with various chapters at schools and different places around the country that looks to help exonerate wrongfully convicted murderers. And so there was such a case, and they got this guy off for murder who was like days away from execution, and got some other guy, this guy who's now suing, to confess. He said he was forced to confess because of some phony video that was made up about him. The lawyers, an investigator, and worst of all, well, I don't know if that's worse than the lawyer doing this, but the head of this Innocence Project at Northwestern University was a journalism professor. Very, very odd. But I know that Mari's got a lot to say about this because this is her alma mater, and she was involved in this very program and knows about this professor. So when I read the story, I think this professor was in over his head looking for glory, and he wanted the attention of overturning a conviction, which then led the state of Illinois to ban the death penalty. Looked really great for him. Is this a fair assessment of this guy?
here's the thing. I think that the whole situation is very unfortunate because this was a famed program. Like you said, the Innocence Project has chapters all over. What was unique about Northwestern, which is my alma mater, go Wildcats, is that this was a program that was for undergraduate journalism students, and it was a fantastic program during its length. Now, I will say the program is still going on underneath a new professor, but it's not what it once was. Professor David Protas started this program at Northwestern's undergrad journalism school at Medill, and it was a great way for journalism students to be exposed to the justice system, to be exposed to investigative reporting. And the idea was he would get letters from hundreds of thousands of convicts from around the country saying that they were wrongfully accused. And obviously, you know, in Illinois, because the school is in Illinois, they would center it on convicts in Illinois, and students would spend, even though, you know, you would take the class first semester, you would work on the case, and that case would go on for years with different students working on this case every semester, interviewing people, interviewing either old witnesses, interviewing new witnesses, and it was a fantastic program because, like you said, Anthony Porter, the original person who they got off of death row, on the eve of his of what was supposed to be his execution, the governor at the time decided to halt executions in Illinois, and then eventually executions in Illinois are no longer exist. Death row in Illinois no longer exists because, in part, of David Protas's Innocence Project and program. I think that his program is now in shambles, one, because of Al Story-Simon. He's the man who is now suing Northwestern, and also because of another case where they alleged very similar things, that the professor took it too far, that his lead investigators took it too far, and this I don't agree with, that the students took it too far, that they were so involved with getting someone off of death row that they, you know, blurred the lines.
Somebody else under the bus.
This is the situation that led him to retire in 2011, right?
Yes. So basically, this is the second time that this professor has been alleged to have blurred the line of right and wrong, and you know, it's an interesting dynamic, though, because the Cook County District Attorney's Office has never liked Professor David Protas, and they've never liked this program. And in 2011, when the District Attorney's Office came forward and said there is something wrong with this program, they took it too far. They tried to get a subpoena of students' grade reports over the years because they were trying to prove that students got a better grade if they could provide evidence that the supposed wrongfully convicted convict was innocent, which is utterly false. There was no connection between a good grade and, you know, trying to prove this person innocent. Do I think that Professor David Protas, and especially his lead investigator, took things too far? Yes, but do I think that it's a sad day for Northwestern because what was once a great program is now in shambles? And do I think that Al Story-Simon is suing Northwestern because they have the big pockets as opposed to suing? You know, Northwestern's only one part of this puzzle. The district attorney's office still brought a case against him, and a jury still convicted him. So I think they're targeting Northwestern because they have the big pockets here. And I think it's unfortunate. I just want to wrap up with one thing because I want to get your comments on it. When I first applied to Northwestern, there's something called the Why Northwestern Statement. I'm sure you did it for when you guys applied to your undergrad. And it was why I want to go to Northwestern. This very program was the reason why I wanted to go to Northwestern. I literally wrote a hypothetical news article that Mari Fagel helps to exonerate a wrongfully convicted inmate. That was my why Northwestern statement because of this very program. And so it's very unfortunate with what's happened.
It's a great, you know, I think the Innocence Project, it was founded by a good friend of mine, Barry Scheck, in 1992, and I think it does the work of God. It literally restores people's lives and liberties who've been wrongfully convicted, and it happens all the time. And I think, you know, we have a pretty okay criminal justice system, but it's not perfect, and there are flaws. And I think this is something that is in place that at least addresses some of these flaws. And, you know, I think it would be a real shame to judge the Innocence Project based on what happened at Northwestern. I think a better example of the work that the Innocence Projects do across the nation is perhaps the recent case, and it was the University of Virginia Law School Innocence Project. I think think, that's involved in Adnan Syed's DNA motion, to bring in DNA evidence. This was did you guys follow Serial, the podcast? Fascinating. So Susan Koenig of NPR did the podcast of 12 episodes of Serial, and she followed this case and handed it over to the Innocence Project, which took an interest in looking into what really happened and whether Adnan Syed was the right person who was convicted. So anyway, I think that it's unfortunate this happened, because I think it also doesn't look good for the Innocence Project, and I think people need to understand that this is just a very specific situation involving this professor, the conflict of interest with handing a lawyer to Simon, essentially, who is works closely with the investigator, and so I think this is just a situation-specific thing, and definitely not representative of the.
I wonder if the problem here is that the Innocence Project at Northwestern was headed up by the journalism department, and if it would have been different.
They also have one at the law school, but I think it's fantastic that journalism students get to take a part in it, because these undergrads, a lot of people have decided to go to law school because they took part in this program in their undergraduate experience. So I think it is unfortunate.
I don't know. One of the points that I read is that there are different legal standards and journalism standards, and I don't know if the ethics are one and the same. I've not studied journalism, but there's a standard when you're collecting evidence from a legal perspective that you may not need to follow when you're a journalist. And so when the two sort of worlds collide, I think it can get a little bit hairy, and I'm not really clear that it's a good idea for. I think journalists should be able to report on what's going on, but that their investigation can get so involved so as to present new evidence. I mean, this confession, was coerced out of him because these students claimed. Or no, they created a video of somebody saying that they saw. I mean, it was just an elaborate scheme
I think
to get a confession from him, and maybe lawyers would do that, but lawyers they're
more confined.
Yes.
I think that the professor and that his lead investigator that he worked with took things too far.
Yes.
The students weren't the ones who created this scheme. The students, basically what they do is they put on their journalist cap and they go out and they interview people who were there at that time, and then they hand over the results of those interviews to the district attorney's office, who then decides what to do next. And so I think that is all completely appropriate. I think it's a wonderful learning experience. I do think that yes, in this particular situation, the professor and the lead investigator took things too far, but that doesn't mean that these students shouldn't have the opportunity to keep learning and to keep having this great experience, which is why I think it's good that the class is still going on at Northwestern, though I don't know how much longer now that they're hit with another $40 million suit.
I think that's it for Tipping the Scales. Thanks, guys.
Yes, but please do weigh in online. Tweet us at Mari Fagel,
at Azari Law,
at Chelsea Galicia,
and let us know, do you think that these wrongful conviction programs, these innocence projects, do more harm than good? And please weigh in on the rest of the stories we discussed today: the Mexican Mafia, Aaron Hernandez, Bruce Jenner, Jay-Z and his love child, George Zimmerman. We do want to hear your input, and thank you so much for joining us. We will be here same time, same place next week. Thank you.
See you.
From producers Maria Menounos, Dario Kristen, Tiana Hobson, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire BHL crew, we would like to thank you for supporting Black Hollywood Live, the first online broadcast network dedicated to African American entertainment. For questions and comments, contact us at info@blackhollywoodlive.com. Like us on Facebook, tweet us, or Instagram us at BHL Online. And I'm your BHL announcer, Scipio. Instagram me at Planet Scipio. Thank you for tuning in.
The views expressed here are those of the host only and do not necessarily reflect the views of BHL or its owners or principals.